Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this video is about Gatsby and Contentful and rich text. So I've learned a whole lot about this actually really interesting and ongoing saga over the last couple of hours researching this. Now let's just kind of set the stage for the story. Okay, and I think this is the article I want to bring up. I'll post a link to this article in the video description because this article really kind of there's all really kind of help put a lot of pieces together along with just kind of sifting through GitHub and reading GitHub issues. And I'll post a link to this as well because this actually had a lot of really useful information if you're dealing with this problem. But essentially, Gatsby, again, this is the React-based static site generator. That's really super cool. I use it for a lot of really super cool things, mostly Markdown based. Contentful, the really cool headless CMS that allows you to say, basically warehouse data and then just deliver it to your front end, however you decide to build it. And the story is about the rich text field. Okay, so again, there's different types of data fields you can have on any headless CMS. So it's like just plain text, which is like what I usually use. I'll just do all the formatting in the code. There is number of fields, and then there's rich text fields. Now, rich text fields use rich text formatting. Okay, which is kind of like what a rich text editor does. Okay, and just to kind of show you an example, let me just go to this dummy page here where I console log the output. So when you save data as rich text, it's not JSON. It's a little bit different. So let's see if I can find, here we go, raw. So like this string right here, that is the raw rich text value. So it's not HTML, it's not JSON, it's rich text format. Now the way this used to work with Contentful, because Contentful has a Gatsby plugin. So let me bring in the practice project. So basically what you would do is you would install the Gatsby, you would have a Gatsby project. You would install the Gatsby source Contentful plugin. Okay, so I'd install that. And then you would configure it in your Gatsby config. You would then configure it. And then here's where you would put in like the information about your particular Gatsby account. My details are hidden behind environmental variables, so that way you can't invade my stuff. And again, you'll see like this little link here for where you can learn more about environmental variables in Gatsby. Okay, but essentially that's how you would configure Gatsby to work with Contentful. Okay, and then in Contentful, you'd be able to go to like graphical, like this thing, and then figure out what your query is. Now, this was actually really tricky because what happened is that the way it used to work, because it was like a version 2 and now we're at version 4 for this like Contentful plugin. In version 2, it used to give you the rich text as JSON, okay, which, JSON is just super easy to work with. But apparently there were certain issues, particularly with like assets, like photos, things like that. So so you'll see like if you Google a lot about the rich text plugin, you find a lot of it talking about JSON and working with JSON, because that's the way it used to work. But in 2020, they changed it, they upgraded it, and now it gives you the raw rich text formatting. And that means the way you have to kind of render it is a little bit different. The way you have to do your queries are a little bit different. And none of this stuff was spelt out anywhere. Okay, like I had to grab a lot of this from different pieces. So this whole backstory was really articulated really well in this article. Okay, and it points out some of the really important pieces here. Like if you walk through this, it kind of points it out. And actually, it's kind of all here. So this is actually a pretty good article that kind of gives you the bottom line. I just kind of figured out most of this before I got to this point. But now your queries, essentially, basically what you're doing is you have to query the raw text, and then you also need to query the references. Okay, and there might be different types of references. So what you do is you do this ... on, which just means that if this thing exists for this particular like post or whatever, then get this data. And then this, and again, if you're not familiar with like the GraphQL syntax, that's another story for another day. But the idea here is like Contentful has a bunch of nodes of data that it organizes into this sort of like GraphQL syntax, and you can like use graphical, this tool right here, to like shape a GraphQL query to get the exact data you want. So essentially, because I created a model called post on Contentful, there's this all Contentful post that node that appears, because it creates a bunch of nodes based on what's in my Contentful account. So I would say, hey, I want, I want all Contentful posts, I want all post models, I want the raw stuff, and I want everything that it references. So these are like other assets that I have in Contentful, photos, videos, etc., that I may reference inside the rich text. But a couple things that you're not going to get from just clicking around here, you have to kind of add manually, is stuff like this. So you have to add like ... on Contentful. This just makes it sort of conditional. So that way, if your particular asset doesn't have it, it doesn't show up in the final output. This makes the type name show up there. This is also necessary because the new parser will use the type name to figure out like what's what. So if I go back to the demo site, and I go back here, and I go then I go here, the references. See, I get this type name property, and the type name property contains like Contentful asset, and it's using that to figure stuff out. So again, basically, I end up getting this like raw property. And then this raw property, or this is technically the object you're going to want, the one that has raw and references, because raw is the raw thing, and references are all like the assets that it refers to. Cool. Okay, so that's essentially like, again, if you're at the point where you're still trying to figure out the GraphQL, like you haven't got the stuff to render yet, this is sort of like that step. Like that's the thing you want. Because I ran into the issue where I kept trying to pass in the raw code directly to this function. Because what's going to happen is that on the particular Gatsby page where you want to do this stuff at, let me go to that practice.js, you're going to import these things. Okay, and I'll explain what these things are. Main thing I'm going to talk about now is render rich text. What this function does is it renders that rich text format into a React component. Okay, so basically you render rich text, the function, and what you do is you pass in the individual rich text object, and then you pass in these options, which I'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so if I just pass in the post, it's just going to render like whatever's there. Not going to do any kind of custom formatting. So I could just pass in nothing for options, and it would just render this stuff as like default like H1s and H2s and image tags and whatever. So actually, let me just do that real quick. I'll take the options out for a moment, and let's just see what happens. So if I go here and I refresh the page, see, I still see this, but I don't see like the image because I didn't tell it how to handle the image. And this text is actually from the rich text formatting thing inside of Contentful. Like that's from Contentful. Okay. Oh wait, that's not this. Okay, here we go. Render rich text. So that's what this function does. Okay. And then what we do is I save the output of that into this variable called output, and then I just rendered that output as the output for this particular page. And again, there's the query. Again, the articles that I'm going to put in there. But now let's say you want to customize. So I want to process that image so that way the image has like an image tag. That's where the options come in. Okay, so you can create an options object. So I'm going to put that options object over here again. But see here, I created this options object. And it has a property called render node. There's more properties you can put in there. It's in the documentation. But all I really cared about was the assets. So then we have to, and this is why we need this blocks thing. Because essentially what it does is that this allows you to create a function in this property of the render node object. And again, so this has to be called render node. Like this could be called whatever you want. Options, you can call it cheese options, whatever you want. This has to be called render node. And then this property blocks.embeddedAssets gives a function. Is here we're passing it a function that's going to be run on every embedded asset. So for every photo, for every video, it's going to run this logic. Now, since I'm assuming that I'm only going to have photos, I just ran image logic. If you have like photos and videos, you may want to do more. So what I did is, again, we get the node, we get this embedded asset node. I'm going to console log it because I don't know all the properties that are in there. So I console log it, and that shows up right over, I think, no, that's not it. Here it is, node type. So here's the node. So here's like the image node that I got, because there's only one image. And in there's content that's empty, data, target, and then here's all the information. So if I had a description, that would be useful. So right now I don't have a description for the photo. Maybe I can add a description to the photo. So let me go ahead over to Contentful and add a description for the photo. Or I'll just add another asset. So let's embed another asset. Let's create a new asset. I call it cheese, more cheese, and I will just upload a random photo. Okay, publish the photo. Cool. And then there's that, publish changes. So now let me refresh this, see if it grabs the new updated image. I think I have to restart the Gatsby server again because I think it pulls that in at the time of I'm starting the server. So let's do that. Control C. Gatsby develop. Give that a second to finish doing its thing. So yeah, it's repulling everything, building all of my nodes. Fun, 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 fun. Okay, so let's refresh. Do I get the Ruby image now? Yep, there it is. Good. Okay, so now see, I get two console logs, one for the second image. So let's see if the second image had any more information since I gave it more details. Contentful, fixed, type, asset. Target, Contentful ID, fixed. Name. Let's see if I could have grabbed that extra detail from GraphQL. Maybe I didn't include that. Okay, so Contentful ID with height. So let's go over here and look at references. I could add the description. Okay. And title. Let me make sure I add that in my query so that way I have that data. So let me update my query. And let me just actually make sure I get what I think I'm going to get. So let's see here, Contentful asset. Yep, so there's a title and description because I can use that for like an alt tag. Let me update my query. Paste. Okay, so that's going to rebuild itself. Now, if I go back to here, I take a look, it should be a new console log. So this should be refresh. So if I go here back to the Ruby one, I should see, yep, see now I have the title and description. Good. Okay, and the cool thing is I can now use that for, I can use that for like an alt tag. So if I go back to my code here, so again, there's a node. And see, it's like node data. So inside node, there's a property called data, which there's a property called target. And target is where all the stuff is at. So technically over here for the alt tag, instead of just putting in the string of cheese, I want to inject that variable. So node.data.target. We'll say title. Okay. And again, basically this function here from the options is going to run once for each image. Okay. So in that case, now if I go back, I should see that both of these images. So let me go to elements and let's inspect the first image and see it has the alt tag of PHP. If I go to the second image, well, because I called it cheese, so that's fine. And see the Ruby image has a alt tag of cheese. So now they dynamically have alt tags. I don't have to manually add them because it's running through that logic, and I can do whatever I want with the image. Like that's the cool thing about that. Like you can design like what does it, how does it handle each asset here. Okay, so again, I will link to those two useful posts in the video description, but essentially, let's recap. Okay, so basically, assuming you had like a blank Gatsby project, step one, you start up a blank Gatsby project. Step two, install the Gatsby source Contentful. After that, you're going to config Gatsby source Contentful. So here's the configuration of it. Okay. And then after you do that, you're going to design your query. Okay, so I went into GraphQL, and it should look something like this. Okay, this kind of thing I had to type in myself. Okay, so I'm saying for every reference, ... on contentful asset. So basically, it's matching up each contentful asset, creating an asset for each one, and then again, I'm including the type name, and then make sure that I include any fields I want to have access to. So I make sure I added description and title. Here's the information about the image, the ID of the thing. So I'm going to get that for each thing. So I'm getting the body raw. So essentially for each post, I should be getting an object with the raw property, which has the raw rich text, and references, which has the information on all the images in that particular post. Okay. So if I get my query right, I should be able to compare it here and see like, hey, look, I got the raw markdown, and then I get a reference object that has like an image. So you know, like, there's a title of the image, the URL of the image, all that fun stuff. Okay. So then we go to the page we're creating in Gatsby. So in this case, practice.js. Again, you have to always export your query. So export const rich text posts. It doesn't matter what the variable name is. GraphQL, then there's my query. And then again, that query gets added to props. Okay, so basically that where that data gets found is inside your props object. So here I'm extracting the post. So first thing I did is I console log that props object earlier, and then I figured out where that data was inside of this. Then I grabbed it. Okay, so you might have to do some digging there. But again, you want the piece that has like the raw and the references property. That's what needs to be passed into render rich text, not the raw property, the parent object of the raw property. That's what needs to be passed in as the post. And then you can pass in this options where you can like basically manipulate different parts of the text. And there's other things you can do, not just the assets, but you can embed like the actual like paragraphs. There's different things here, like if I were to create another one, I could do like blocks dot, and so you can create a function for all sorts of different things, like for any headings, paragraphs, lists that are in the rich content, and then create a way that like it'll run that function every time it runs into that type of thing in the rich content, for you to kind of create a, if you want to do like a particular styling for each one or whatever. Not my favorite way of doing things. Okay, one thing I've learned in doing this is I probably won't use rich text. I mean, I can understand why, because the idea is you want, let's say you create a blog for a client, you want them to go in the Contentful and be able to use like the rich text editor, and they can format their posts. I do find this a lot less intuitive to use than just using like the raw text and doing the formatting from the front. But again, the idea being like who the end user is, who's the person deciding on the formatting. Is it the developer or is it the person creating the content? So in the case where it's the client who has to do all the formatting, then you have to use the rich text thing, so that way they can format things, and you have to kind of go through all these machinations. But essentially, that's how you would do that. So basically, then here in your options object, okay, again, you do a blocks embedded asset, and then here you would do a function, and then you can decide what gets outputted for each asset. So in this case, I'm outputting an image to any asset that comes in, because I'm assuming they're an image. I'm just outputting a image tag that has a source of the URL. So I went, and again, I console logged that image, so that way I can kind of hunt around what's the data inside there. So I can figure out where the image URL is, and then the title, so that way I can put that as the alt tag. Okay, and that's how I did that. But then again, always make sure you remove all these console logs or comment them out when you're done, so that way they don't show up when people visit your website. Okay. Cool. So hopefully this will help people out who are trying to use Contentful's rich text field in their projects. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.